Right. Good evening, everyone, from a very warm York. Welcome to this evening's People Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Jane Burton. I'm chair of the committee. First of all, we have apologies for absence. We have apologies for Councillor Mason. We have apologies from Councillor Moroney and Councillor Rose is sobbing for him. And we have apologies from Councillor Nichols. Before we go any further, does anybody have any declarations of interest to do with tonight's agenda? No? Fine. We have the minutes with our papers from the 11th of June, 2025. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes, any corrections, or can we take those as passed?
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Clark had kindly flagged we've got a bit of repetition in the public participation item at number 3, repeats the text of the declarations of interest above. So we'll look at that.
Look at that. Yeah, thank you very much for that, James. Nobody else? So can we take those as minutes have passed? Yeah, okay, fine, lovely. Okay, so next item 4 on the agenda is public participation. We have one public participant this evening. We have Flick Williams, who's speaking remotely on agenda item 5. Read the implications for this of the government's legislative agenda. And can you hear us, Miss Williams?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. So you know the score. I'll just let you go whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Throughout my remarks today, I shall use the acronym SEND because broken down, the language is not consistent with the social model of disability that has been adopted by this council. In 2001, when the SENDA was passed into law, Disability Equality in Education and its sister organisation, the Alliance for Inclusive Education, lobbied hard to avoid this othering ableist language to no avail. It's clear that a great deal of hard work is being expended into producing this updated strategy as the current one ends. However, my fear is how much of it will survive this Labour government's legislative agenda. Hot on the heels of their being forced to climb down over cuts to personal independence payments, at least for now, ministers are out doing the media rounds, briefing about the SEND white paper coming in October. It's clear their intention is to restrict the use of education, health and care plans to the most severely disabled children. As you heard me say to this committee's predecessor in May, genuinely person-centred approaches do not require formal diagnosis. The disability rights movement slogan, labelled "Jars Not People," became obsolete in recognition that the support only comes with the label. In education, that was first statements and now EHCPs. Mirroring the debate that is being had about social security, the narrative is clearly there are too many children requiring support and ways must be found in order to ration it. By reducing eligibility to the instrument that unlocks statutory support, the need doesn't disappear, simply the help and support. And there's more bad news. Many parents who availed themselves of private education in order to get their child's needs met are now, as a direct result of government fiscal policy, being forced to rejoin state schools, putting further pressure on the SEND system. Beware the warning signal being sent by government contained in the detail of the Universal Credit Bill. For those paying attention, there is a clause within that which restricts the acceptance of medical evidence to that provided by the NHS. So for all those parents frustrated by unacceptably long waiting lists and desperate for diagnosis of the different neurodivergent conditions, turning to private healthcare to provide them for their children, this suggests to me that they may well find themselves outside the eligibility criteria for the new version of EHCPs or whatever might replace them. So just like with social security, this government, in response to growing need, is creating a narrative of the deserving and the undeserving. Rather than even beginning to address the underlying causes of rising rates of impairment in both children and adults, we are thrown into an arena of competing with one another for scarce resources as a direct result of political choice. Need is need. What the here today, gone tomorrow Labour government seem not to realise is that the disabled children failed today become the unnecessarily dependent adults of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I've noted down quite a few of your points, which we will discuss perhaps out of this meeting and maybe address those with using a letter to the Secretary of State. But your comments have been noted and they're very valuable. Thank you for sharing those with us. Right, okay. Moving on now to item 5, we have update on the York Inclusion and Belonging Special Educational Needs and Alternative Provision Strategy 2025 to 2030. And joining us this evening, we have Maxine Squires, who is Assistant Director of Education and Skills, Victoria Coyle, Head of Integrated Special Educational Needs Department. Is it department? Jodie Farquharson, Head of Public Health, Healthy Child Service. And I don't think...
Apologies, Chair. Jodie, unfortunately, is ill this evening, so isn't able to attend. So she does send her apologies.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry. So Ginny Hitchin, Parent Carer Forum Representative. Thank you. Sophie Gray is not here either. No. No. Okay, so welcome and thank you very much for coming this evening. Shall I put it over to you to present this item?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction to the paper and then hand over to Victoria. As you will see in the documentation that you have, our current SEND strategy is due for review because it comes to an end at the end of the chronological year of 2025. So it gave us a good opportunity to begin to think about what we had learnt from the experience of having that strategy in place, but also what we've learnt between 21 and 25 from the work that we've done to look at the experience of parents and carers and children and young people in the city and what they've consistently been telling us about their experience of provision in the city. We did feel that we want to reposition our new strategy around inclusion and belonging, and that does fit in with promoting that social model of disability, which we have championed as a city. We also feel that it's a great opportunity as well to learn from some of the work that's been taking place nationally through things like the National Change Programme for SEND, which has been trialling some interesting and new ways of working, which are very much looking at how the system can be developed in more innovative ways nationally, taking on board our speakers' concerns. What we're very keen to do in York is ensure that we've got a strategy which is very focused on the experiences of our children and families and is going to make a difference in terms of their journey into adulthood. And so we are very much viewing this as not just following the national trend, but setting the national trend. So that's really where we're positioning this. I'll hand over to Victoria.
Thank you. Yes, so I think those are really relevant points that we heard before. So thinking about belonging and our use of language and the isolation and the terms that families can feel undermined by is really important for us. So I think we're trying to recognise this in the strategy and also writing a strategy at a time of key national uncertainty. And I suppose more now than ever, we need to make sure we do have a strategy and get it right. So I feel like this is an important part of us getting ahead of things nationally anyway. As Maxine said, we know that the change programme, which has been informing the national direction, is largely going to be around inclusion in schools, and a lot of work around that. We're not entirely sure where it's going to go with EHC plans, but clearly anything we're doing around inclusion and belonging and mainstream inclusion is a very important thing for us in York. So we will need to remain flexible and open to coming back to this if things change considerably. However, I feel that we're still in the right place for developing these plans going forward. So we are focusing on that sense of inclusion and belonging. And as we said before, we are trying to make sure that children and young people with special educational needs are included from 0 to 25, but that also means where they may not have yet had a diagnosis, or for those children and young people who are home educated, or where they are not attending school, or where they may not want to go for a diagnosis. So that's the approach that we've taken and from the feedback. It aligns very much with the autism and ADHD strategy that we came to Scrutiny for just a few weeks ago. And that's because although that's an all-age strategy, there are some very key similarities. So the core kind of work around inclusion and the things we'll go through in the priorities are very much going to support that work in that strategy. So we've been keen to make sure that we're aligning them both through consultation and the learning that we've had from both. We've gone, and we're all probably aware of all the background information that 11 years on from the Children and Families Act, what we're seeing now in the national context. And that is being seen in Ofsted inspections, where we're seeing areas come out in outcome 3, which is the lower outcome. You know, those consistent areas we know need improving. So families needing to have more support while they're waiting potentially for a diagnosis, in terms of provision, you know, specialist provision, communication, consistency, experience, and things around alternative provisions. So those are areas which we want to make sure we're reflecting a plan for in York as well. I suppose we know our city well. We know the sorts of things we need to plan for. There's lots of strategies out there. We've got a sufficiency strategy. And we are still seeing those local growths as well. So we know we've got a growth in EHC plans in York, and that's gone up considerably in the last couple of years. But we've got some key strengths that I want to draw your attention to. So we have really good support from our schools in terms of our York Schools and Academies Board, who are really leading some of this work around inclusion and poverty proofing, and we'll want to make sure we continue that relationship. We've got some really good attainment outcomes in Key Stage 4. We work very hard with our attendance teams to improve attendance. And although we've got some concerns for our SEND cohort, we also have very low permanent exclusion rates in York. And this is very important for us to showcase that as well. It's not the case in other areas. So we're building this strategy from a position of certain strengths, and that's important as we take forward the priorities. So the key priorities we've set out then are inclusive practice in schools, improving training and development for the workforce, that's across the board, making sure the improvement in communication for families is joined up more. Our York local offer needs some more navigation support, really, and making sure that families don't feel isolated. Now, we've got the SEND hub coming online, which we're hoping will be a key important part of that milestone, a place for families to go, a breathing space, somewhere to talk to someone, and navigation. So the strategy has some really practical things that we want to see happen in the first year. So this is a partnership strategy. So it's not just the local authority, it's very much around schools and settings, and that's our early year settings right through to our primary, secondary schools, our academies, our colleges, our special schools, and our health partners and our social care partners. And this strategy will be overseen by the SEND and Alternative Provision Partnership Board. So it will have an action plan that goes with it. We've done a lot of consultation so far, and this is part of the consultation, so thank you for that. This will very much feed into this. We've tried to build on the information we've had from other strategies. We've done some parent-carer surveys, we've done some activities with families, and that continues. And that is leading to actual change. And we'll be doing a full consultation from next week through till the beginning of September, and that again will shape the final document. So that pretty much sums it up. The actual priorities then, we have considered the first sort of areas around voice and visibility. That's really important still as our number one sort of area in terms of not just individual plans for children, but in the sort of the role they play in shaping our services. So that's an area we're working on. We talked about how do we support inclusive mainstream schools. That is a huge piece of our work across our partnership over the next year to 18 months. We've got to look at the sufficiency as well. So we need to look at where those placements are expanded. We know we've got some really good provision within our what we call enhanced resource provisions. And we want to look at developing more around that, as well as more support for schools for social, emotional and mental health needs. And preparation for adulthood comes up everywhere in Ofsted inspections as an area to be improved. And it's the same for us in York. So we really do want to focus the work that's already in place. We've got some really good practice around supported internships in York and developing pathways to employment. And we want to make sure, though, that we are looking much more widely about how to do that planning much earlier. So that still remains those 4 priorities. We still have to develop the measures about what we think makes a difference and how we might measure that. We started that conversation with families, but it needs a bit more work. So we will continue to do that. And I think that's it really. So open up to any questions.
Okay, thank you. And just before we do go to questions, Jenny, is there anything you'd like to say about what's been presented so far? Would you like to come in later? You've got to put your microphone on. Sorry, it's the.
There you go.
I don't know how it
works. Thank you. I'll just say a short bit now, which is that what we consistently hear from our families, which are the views of the parents and carers, but often we find that they're advocating for their young people's best interests as well. We hear that despite this arena of change that we're coming into with regards to SEND and government initiatives, and we hear fears from parents that might cause some tensions between what they would like to see. However, first and foremost is, despite what changes happen, that the rights of children's access to education is at the heart of it, whether that be in settings or aspirationally, yes, the schools would be places for every child to thrive. But the reality over the next 3 to 5 years is it might take a little bit of time to do that, and we may still have a cohort who aren't able to access settings. So it's still looking at their opportunities and rights to access education. And the same goes for the rights of children to access healthcare, mental health care and physical health care, even when they do have diagnoses of neurodivergence and health conditions. So it's really keeping those rights at the heart of everything that we look at. And lastly, most parents and carers in York that we see anyway would love to be listened to and trusted by professionals to be able to work together to identify the support that's needed as early as possible to avoid those further health conditions. So it's about that communication and trust.
And listening and being heard early enough.
Absolutely.
Which I'm getting from the report that this is very much what they want to do. So thank you for that. Thank you. So over to members. I've got Councillor Rose and Councillor Runciman. Thank you. Sorry, it's Councillor Rose first. I saw.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for all the work on this. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. I just wanted to get in early to recognise some of what Flick had said in public participation. It does feel like the government are rationing support a bit. Private school change is putting extra pressure on the system. We know that diagnosis shouldn't be necessary, but we also know it sometimes seems to be. There is therefore, as a result of that, excess pressure on youth diagnosis, which is compounded by difficulties in adult diagnosis and other things. The strategy does recognise this. It tackles a lot of this. A lot of the great things like Send Hub, career pathway support plays a part in that. And most of that's independent of whatever happens nationally. But I just wanted to kind of recognise that it is shifting sand nationally, and there are justified fears from children and parents in this area. Tangibly, from your perspective, and possibly from yours as well, Bob, what do you think are the largest risks, barriers from that national place? Is it mostly financial? Could there be legislative or policy impact on us? Like what's the risk around the strategy coming from above?
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. I think the biggest risks nationally are not the government not doing a proper impact assessment on their proposals, and then that creating unnecessary anxiety within local areas about raising people's fears that things will change very, very quickly and that it will have an immediate impact. What we know is that the current 2014 Act has a presumption around inclusion in mainstream. So it was actually written, if you read the 2014 Children and Families Act, the opening statement is that the majority of children's needs will be met in mainstream schools and settings. And so one of the things that that Act didn't do was then think about how do you make that real? And it didn't do a proper financial risk assessment and then reset the national system so that it could actually do that well. It was a good ambition, and it's an ambition that we continue to have. But the key thing is, if you are going to do this well this time, then parents and carers will want to see that it has dealt with some of the issues that they've got about the support that their children need to be able to access in every classroom. And that requires it to be properly funded. And that is one of the things I think that is a key risk, that the thought hasn't gone into that. And I think I am hoping that this time there has been really, really careful assessment of what it would take to make the system work.
I think Councillor Webb would like to just come in on this.
Yeah, I'll be quite brief because I think Maxine's covered a lot, particularly around the funding. I think we must recognise that people quite rightly cost money to look after and support and help to thrive, right? And it's a good thing to spend money on people and spend it well and wisely on their education. And I hope that the government recognises that. The other thing that I'd probably say is that I hope that when changes are brought in, they've changed what that change looks like, I don't know, that it's done cautiously and considerately, that it's not just thrown in and then that's it, we move forward and carry on. I think that there's one thing I found from doing this role and previous roles has been the 2014 Act happened, and then it sort of seemed like government moved on and looked at lots of other things, which I'm sure we had a history of that over the last decade, haven't we? And actually there needs to be consideration of what's going on and what the impact is longer term. And then I think finally, it's just worth acknowledging that children, young people, and especially their parents who are currently navigating the current system that we have are, and I hope I'm not putting words in people's mouths, but tired of fighting and tired of the fight. And that does mean that it will be quite stressful for families who are looking at what changes could come, and that they're already in a heightened state of anxiety because of the system that they're currently in. So whilst rationally you think, yes, things do need to change, we've got to really put our arms around our families and support them through what that change looks like. I hope that the change will be positive. I'm really confident that it will be positive, but only if we bring everybody with us as we make those changes. And I'm not talking about this particular strategy, that's more the national issue, which is the question you raised, Councillor Rose. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Councillor Runciman, then Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I too am worried about what's coming from the national government. I'm worried about the money. I'm worried about whether there will be a simplistic solution which won't work. I know a fair bit about special needs, and you can't have a one size fits all. It just doesn't happen. But what I'd like to ask Victoria, I think would be the person to ask, is on page 11, paragraph 2, it's how you get all these difficult to get at families who are not in school and who may be educating them at home or in alternative provision or have a part-time table. How do you get all those people on board when they're not as easy to get at as the children who are in a special school? And Jenny may want to comment on it, I don't know.
Thank you. I mean, as part of the engagement work that we've done, we held a session, didn't we, with families, and a lot of the families there were raising the sorts of concerns around the kind of their children, the non-attendant, and their concerns around that. So in terms of engagement, I feel that that really has shaped this strategy because it's such a prominent need in our city. So in terms of the actual solution to that, so I feel like the strategy will be addressing the main concerns of families around those children who are not seen, who are not going in, the stresses about reintegration, the approaches to reintegration, how we support those children, because that comes down to skilling the workforce, looking at the things within school, the practice, their understanding, understanding of why children mask, the things around emotional school-based avoidance, all of those things. Trauma-informed schools are all the things which we are making our focus in terms of our plan. So I feel in that respect, and obviously, Jenny, you will have a real view on this as well. I think that we have completely captured that, and it will be a challenge to do that. But the start of that challenge is the work around inclusive schools, the training, and that continued sort of step in that direction, I think. Jenny,
yes, thank you. I think I can see the changes made since the engagement event with our parents and carers, and a lot of that is reflected in this draft of the strategy. For example, it reads far more now about schools and settings, only children who are in schools and settings, which didn't just, but a lot of the feedback from families is this about all children's access to education? I think far more now it does read like that. I think we do have to how to reach those cohorts will be building that trust and communication, reducing the parent blame and the home environment blame as the reasons why these young people are struggling in the school environment, and therefore separating, being very clear, which may change in legal terms with the Children's Wellbeing Bill, but currently, for example, a parent's right to choose elective home education in itself is not a safeguarding concern. However, currently, lots of those families, in fact, statistically, those families are far more often referred to social services, and yet far fewer of them have outcomes that need to be followed up. So unfortunately, with that has come a culture of distrust that as soon as home education is mentioned and health or education or social care settings, it will become a scrutiny on the family environment, which takes the focus off perhaps what the children's barriers are and whether they're awaiting neurodivergence assessment, etc., and that real unpicking. So I think being able to trust that they can go to professionals and say we're having these problems, and actually work together with the professionals to be able to unpick that and not assume that it's a home problem or a mental health problem is key. And the second thing which is key for these cohorts of children, wherever they're not in school, whether it's AOTAS, whether they're just not attending, whether they're too ill, whether they're electively home educated, it's about making sure those educational opportunities are still there for those young people. We've seen a real reduction in those opportunities for those young people to access 14 to 16 college provision. Potentially with some of the changes that are coming, it'll be more difficult for them to access home education groups with the kind of restrictions that might come in around reporting and things like that. So it's just really making sure that we continue to reach these communities and continue to make sure the children have that access to education as is their right in whatever way works for them over the next 3 to 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for a very thorough and comprehensive report. I'm sure this is the blocks on which we can build the next step. And it's that issue that is what concerns me, not necessarily what we managed to achieve here in York, but in terms of how legislation for, if you like, the fractured current situation legislation deals with the fractured current situation and allows us to have a smooth transfer to a new situation. You know, I wouldn't like us to find ourselves with a universal type credit type implementation, which is going to take probably 18 or 19 years before it does the most of what it was supposed to achieve. And I do think that the business of trust and communication is fundamental to this. I absolutely agree with you on that. As I say, my worry is that what we get from the government will not provide a framework that allows that transition from the current situation to a new, more ideal situation, and also that it's funding and, if you like, support to institutions is geared up in the right kind of way for that to happen. You're nodding. I hope that doesn't sound sort of too perfectionist, but it's just an area where if things go wrong, they can go very badly wrong. And I'm not just talking about individuals, it might be a lot of people. So that's my concern about this.
I think Councillor Webb would like to address that point, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yeah, thank you.
Before.
Yeah. The only reason I'm going to address this is I think we need to be clear that what we've got here in front of us is a strategy about what we do here in York and how we move forward. And there's been several comments now from everybody about what might happen in any future changes that the government might or might not propose at some point in the future. And what I just want to avoid is basically not scrutinising this report, firstly, and secondly, moving into sort of speculation, really. I think it just a suggestion that I think even when change does happen, and as I said, it probably will, but we don't know what that looks like yet. When we do actually know what it looks like, that will be a really good item for Scrutiny to have a look at and probably go, all right, well, how do we take this Scrutiny paper, this strategy, and apply it in a new situation? Does it still apply? Does it still work? But I'm not sure if that's a conversation for now when we don't necessarily have any words on paper, really. I know people are starting to float things, but until it's written down, it doesn't really mean much, does it? It's just a thought.
Yes, good thought. Thank you.
Just to pick up on that, it's really the fact that this represents our local area SEND partnerships response to developing a local area SEND and AP strategy as a partnership. And so, yeah, I'd echo what Councillor Webb said, that really it's helpful for Scrutiny to provide some feedback on, do you feel these are the right priorities for our local area SEND partnership? We have worked really hard, or Victoria's worked really hard to track this strategy against the various different strategies that exist in the different aspects of our partnership in the city, to try and give some coherence and some coherent messages. And that's really what we're saying. This is not a finished piece of work. And that's why we wanted to bring it to Scrutiny early, to get your reflections on, does this describe our city? Does it describe the partnership that we want to see in the city around children and families with additional needs?
Yeah, I think these are really good points, because, you know, whatever happens, I think what we've got here is a really good basis for moving forward and progressing special educational needs, and it's well thought out. It's I would say there's been a lot of co-production in here, from listening to families and children and young people, and I think that's a very positive thing. And I think we've got to, whatever happens, we can't speculate too much, but you know what we have here is something that it's quintessentially a very good solid thing. So that's worth hanging on to. Next, I've got Councillor Waller who wanted to ask some questions.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm grateful for this report coming forward. I think it's important that the voice of children and families is uppermost, and that there's recognition of the need to boost specialist capacity and training in schools. I think that is something that I've spoken with a lot of teachers about, the expectations put on schools to respond to the needs of individual children, and they're all different. Local government is in need of additional resources to meet this challenge. And certainly one of the most frustrating aspects that comes through conversations with families is the length of times it takes to get the recognition of the support that the child needs. And it's just tackling those waiting lists which seem to take so long and to lead to so much frustration. What I didn't get from this report was the frustration, tears, and concern that I meet talking to residents who are dealing with this. I think I got the sense of it almost seemed that everything within schools and supporting schools, particularly the health service, is functioning, and it's just a matter of signposting people to the right service and picking up using the right phone number. But that's not the real world experience, and there are so many gaps that are as a consequence of bureaucracy or lack of investment, or there's a whole host of reasons why things don't work out locally quite how they should. And I didn't really get that from this report in terms of looking at where the key pressure points are that might be solved locally with a bit of re-engineering of approach by different partners, because I appreciate that schools and services are doing what they can. It's just there's a point at which you can't do something because it's somebody else's role to do that, and it's recognizing that we don't live in a perfect situation, but we'd like to get closer to it. And in terms of speculation, I think anyone who saw the Secretary of State at the weekend would see It's actually coming from the Secretary of State that this document could be out of date by the weekend. We certainly need, and I would recommend that we get this back at a point where we can see the lie of the land in terms of investment, in terms of any changes to ECHPs, in terms of any significant resolution of the spending pressures that many councils face more strongly than we do in terms of balancing their overall council budgets with these pressures. So I think we just need to be able to see this again when that is clearer. But I would also ask that there's some indication in there of how you deal with situations that aren't working as well as they should be, and how we take that forward.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Waller. That's all very constructive feedback. What I
Okay.
would say is that the bit that we haven't yet put to the strategy is the action plan. So this is the broad framework, but it will have a full action plan with the types of actions that you've identified around what we've learnt about where the gaps are, how as a local area partnership we work together to begin to address some of those. We know that it will have to be a partnership response because no one partner has got all the solutions on their own. And that's why it's very important that our colleagues in health who are going through their own changes at the moment are also working alongside us in the development of this strategy, which they have been doing. And also our colleagues in social care obviously are also implementing a really significant change over the next few years as a result of the outcomes of the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Act. And I think we have to view that as all about a landscape which is beginning to change. And one of the things that is a key message from that shift in the landscape is intervene early, early help.
Yeah.
And that's coming out from all of the changes that are happening in our health service, in what's happening with social care, and also some of those messages as well that are coming back around what's needed to have a truly inclusive education system. So I think there are some key messages that are actually reinforcing each other, and that the way that we shape the work of public services is about that early intervention, early help space. And, you know, there was earlier this week, and I'm sure Councillor Runciman has been looking at it, the Best Start in Life strategy that was published, which again is emphasising that importance of acting early. And I think that's really what I don't want to presume, Jenny, but I think that's really what comes back from our parents' voice. That's what they're wanting to see, that people don't wait, but that when a problem's identified, that all of us use our best endeavours to deal with that quickly.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we hear. And excuse me. And those problems at that earlier stage may not be visible to everybody. So it's about listening to those that know the child best and can pick up on those problems, and having the confidence and feeling supported to move forwards with, you know, supporting those child's needs, even if it may not be immediately obvious, because that's where you're going. If you wait to the point where it becomes very obvious, then that's when you get all these secondary difficulties for the child and the family as well. So I'd agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As a former teacher, I can only utterly agree with all of that, because you see it so often so early on in the classroom. But it was it's some time, 15 years since I've taught, but it, you know, you saw the signs that sometimes were glaringly obvious, but people back then, I think, chose to ignore it a lot. And one thing that really gives me hope, I think, is the fact that we're dealing with mental health issues more openly, and we don't see them as such a stigma, because back then, if you mentioned any sort of mental health issue, then a lot of other teachers even didn't want to acknowledge that. And so I think we're living in a different world now where things are more open. I'm not to say it's a perfect world yet. It's not. And I do know how expensive it can be for intervention to happen. I'm interested, and still bear with me, I'm being a bit naughty, to learn more about the hubs and how they're going to work. Would you be able to explain a bit more about those?
Yes, obviously we're in the implementation plan phase of our Send Family Hub over in Clifton at the moment. It will have its formal opening and launch on the 20th of September, which please do take that as an open invitation to drop in during that day. But we're very much viewing that as an opportunity to view it as a hub and spoke model. So although it has a designation around SEND, it's designed to be somewhere where it becomes easier to get information and to get support, that you can drop in, that there will be people there during both identified times of the week through a programme of activities, but also just people on hand to be able to receive parents and carers who may have just not know where to go next. So that frustration about, I've hit a brick wall and I'm not quite sure how to get over it. There's some of the things that colleagues who will be working in the Send Hub will be there to try and provide that support. We know from what parents and carers have told us that communication is really, really important. And trying to find as many inclusive ways to communicate is one of the things that we really do want to learn from developing these hubs, because as public services, we have set ways of communicating, and they aren't always the most accessible ways. And so one of the things that we're really trying to understand is why doesn't our local offer website prove as accessible as it needs to be? Because we did spend quite a lot of time, a couple of years, redesigning it, but it's still not hitting the mark. So it's really that opportunity to, for me, really good family hubs are about being centres of communication, and that people are feeling that they feel better connected with with services and they understand them better. And so really that's what we're trying to achieve. Jenny has recently taken on a role as being one of our meet and greet family hub navigators for the Send Hub. We felt it was really important that our Parent Carer Forum take the lead on this, because as people who work in services, sometimes we need to stand back and say, is this what you really want? Is this what you expected, before we design something? And so that's very much at the heart of the way that we are doing it differently in this case. So, you know, we haven't named it other than Send Hub at the moment, and there's been a competition running in the city to ensure we actually get a name that resonates for children and young people and families. And that's the approach we want to take. It's no good people designing the offer. It's got to be a co-produced offer. And that is what's different in the approach that we're taking.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Nelson, then Councillor Rose, and then Councillor Vincent. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I really appreciate this report. You can see that there's a lot of work gone into it, and you've sort of spoken to what I'm about to say to a certain extent when you were talking to about the action plan, because I appreciate that those specific actions aren't here. But if I was to have an input, it would be that I feel like the pillars are absolutely where we need to be sort of focusing, but what almost feels like it's missing, but I mean, really, it kind of fits into point 2 and point 3, is how do we ensure, so when you talked at the beginning about how This is about everyone, you know, changing their behaviour to be more inclusive. You know, that doesn't involve a budget, but as someone who's worked in education for a very long time, I appreciate inclusion is often something that primary schools, as an example, are experts at. And, you know, really committed to in terms of bringing in trauma-informed practice or the principles around that, around kind of safe spaces, working with the Education Endowment Foundation guidance on, you know, meeting children's individual needs, and team around the child approaches, and making sure that all of that is in place. But I think that we all know that, you know, and I appreciate that we're doing a lot of work with the Schools and Academies Board, and that they're, you know, inputting into this. But I think that the reality is secondary school, all of that changes. And that is certainly my residents and friends with children in the education system in York who have additional needs. That's where the real barriers start to raise their heads. And we aren't an LEA running those secondary schools. So I suppose my kind of question and challenge, and what I would really want to be seeing in terms of that practical stuff, is how do we, hopefully with the board, how do we get some sort of commitment from those schools to change? Because some of this is about, and about that kind of inclusive practice, it's about how every teacher is trained, you know, and retrained constantly in how to approach all behaviour as communication. What is, you know, what does this individual child need? How can I give them that support? How do we get our school partners on board to actually change their practice in that? And equally, there's all those other partners in terms of the healthcare providers, you know, are CAMS on board with this? And what do we do when, you know, I really appreciated what Jenny was saying about being listened to. And I've had experiences where, for example, CAMS hasn't been the right thing for that child at the right time. But that's like, well, you've had CAMS, you know, if that doesn't work for you and that hasn't worked for your child, sorry, that's the option. So how do we kind of bring our partners who we don't run, how do we get them to feed into this and to really commit to that inclusive practice and all of those things? Obviously, that will come in the action plan, but yeah, anything you've got to say about that, I'd really appreciate.
Yeah, we are doing a big focus on culture in the new school year. So we have a inclusive education conference planned for the 21st of October, and that will focus on, first of all, the culture of inclusion. So it's a long journey, and it's a big thing to change. Because we've had almost, you know, sort of now almost 20 years of secondary schools being expected to be driven by the standards agenda. Obviously, we've got a big cultural change coming because of the changes to the Ofsted education inspection framework, which we still don't know exactly what their definition of inclusion will be, but we do know it's a big part of the big listen. And certainly they have done further consultation around the inclusive schools agenda, and we'll be reporting on that in September. And that will inform what that inclusion focus within their inspection toolkit will look like. I think, will it change overnight? No, because we know that what we're dealing with now is a national education system that has got lots of different players within it. But what we are trying to do is, as a group of educators in York, first of all, agree at what we mean by inclusion. And that is some work that we're doing with a subgroup of teachers and school leaders who are working from the York Schools and Academies Board. So first of all, can we all agree what we mean by inclusive education? So that is one of the things that will help to reset that culture. Some of it we know is teachers feeling quite fearful as well. In you know, they are measured by certain performance measures, and so when I talk to teachers, it's very often that they don't feel they work in a system that gives them permission to do some of the things that they want to be able to do. I also know, because I talk to an awful lot of them, that they really do want to get it right. You know, you don't go into it as a profession not wanting to do the best for children and young people, and so we are seeing quite a lot of innovation and change in going on inside our schools. They sometimes know that they could do more if school based funding was better, but I also was at a meeting with some parents and carers where they were saying, well, not everything's money. And that very loudly came back from the parent carer forum, that there are some changes that they're looking for that aren't about putting a lot of money in, that they're more about the way that people listen, that they respect each other, that they start with the premise that teacher and parents both hold valuable information about the child, and that you've got to bring that together in a partnership, because there will and start with, if you are seeing different things in the classroom to what the parent sees at home, that doesn't mean that's not happening. And so putting those two things together is also what I'm saying about that spirit of early help and early intervention, because that could just be the nugget of information that unlocks learning for that child. And it's that we've got to have a spirit where we can come together in a way where we're courageous enough to say, let's start off by listening to what we collectively understand to be the situation for this child.
If I may just in kind of along those lines, the thing that is in my head right now that kind of has popped into my head is the kind of conversations we've had over the years about, if you don't attend school, you will not achieve in your life, those kind of banners. And I don't know whether they are still up in our schools in York, or some of our schools in York, but that seems to me like the epitome of how many parents, particularly of children with SEN, have talked to us and talked to schools about those banners, and how much of a barrier those banners are to their children attending. And if those banners are still there, then we can talk about this. But how do we make this actually remove, for example, and this is just an example, those banners? It doesn't take any money to do that. But if schools aren't willing to take those banners down, how can we do the next bit of that conversation?
Yeah, one of the keynotes in the conference that we've got in October is about inclusive attendance. So we are bringing an expert to do the keynotes who has been working with lots of local areas around how to develop an inclusive attendance approach. Because again, to be fair, school leaders are held to account by the Department for Education about the fact that there are a lot of children at the moment that are absent from school. And that is one of the things where they are thinking really, really carefully about what that response should look like. But, sometimes they are between the devil and the deep blue sea, to be quite honest. And what we are trying to focus on is recognising that there are some barriers to children attending school which we need to have a better understanding of. And also we need different individuals involved in that, because no one professional can assume the mantle of the expert. And so it's, first of all of us admitting we're not experts in this. We've all of us got different bits of professional skill and background which we can put into this, but there's no one of us with the answer. So we have to work together on it. As I say, my background is teaching in secondary schools. yes, it's a system that has lots of flaws in it, but it's also a system where lots of children do thrive. And so we've got to bear that in mind as well. I think it's really important for us, as I say, to create this focus where our culture will be that we will listen to each other in a way where we are not judging each other. And just starting with that. And just because I have got qualified teacher status does not mean I know everything about your child. I know some things and I can offer some information, but to get a more rounded picture, it's really important that everybody's working together. And that includes CAMS, you know, sort of, or any other bit of health. How do we actually ensure that we are working together in a way that removes the idea that there's some expert out there that's got all the answers? Because I think that's the first barrier that we've got. The expert on children are their families, because they're the people who see them most of the time. They understand them, they know them, and sometimes, yes, they will get really concerned about the fact that they know that there's a problem for their child and they're desperate to try and find somebody who can help with that. And so one of the things that, as I say, we've got to do is first of all start with, what is it that is really concerning this family about this child? And how do we actually work together in a solutions focused way to begin that? And I think if that's what we've got to shift the culture around. And I know Jenny would say the same. She gets that regularly from parents and carers who feel that experts don't listen. They've come with a ready-made solution, or they've decided that you fit into this bit of the assessment system, whatever that is. Whereas one of the things that we know is that everybody's an individual, and we've got to start with that. And we've got to start with, what are your individual needs, and how do we actually work from that, but in a strengths-based way, because everybody has got strengths, and it's really important that we're working in a way that celebrates those strengths and helps them to be demonstrated.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yeah, I just wanted to really reiterate, but it's a lot of this is about cultural change, which will take time. But I think it's also recognising, you know, the example that you gave about the attendance banners, but that through this strategy, although we'd like to have the aspiration of cultural change, absolutely, but it's about how we support our schools to do that, because they are, you know, they have pressures around attendance that probably mean they have to do those banners. I don't know, but you know, that sometimes it just seems that everything can be lumped onto the teachers and the schools, but without the funding and the resources and the support. And actually, how can we, with this strategy, in what is in the power of York as a city, to be able to allow our schools to be as flexible and as not innovative and creative as they can be in meeting these challenges, within the kind of remits that they're assessed against from a national level. I don't know how we can support that, but I'd like to see the strategy support that idea of sort of flexibility, so they can actually respond to their cohort's needs. But also, at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership, culture, a lot of times, and although training is part of that, but there's a lot that can be done to change that without money, without training. And that's where we see our models of best practice, you know, that we hear from parents and carers and families. There are schools, you know, secondary schools are a different beast, but certainly primary schools, we have clear schools that people are so happy with the SEND, and clear schools that we hear a lot about that maybe finding a bit more challenging. And actually what we hear is it's the difference of the culture which starts from leadership. And now we have multi-academy trusts. It starts from the top of the trust leadership values down. And these things don't necessarily take money. So it's how we can support that in this strategy.
Thank you for that, Victoria.
Just very quickly. So in terms of the strategy, then when we do our inclusion conference, of course, this will be leading it in terms of this is our strategy. This is, schools are clearly part of this in terms of their engagement. What was really positive in May, I went to one of the York Pathfinder Academies conference on inclusion, and it was incredibly well attended by primary and secondary schools and leaders, class teachers, middle leaders, and it was very, very it was a day that I came out very optimistic because they really focused on inclusion and the culture of inclusion and what they would expect, but really practical things too. So teaching the secondary schools about how they teach primary maths so that they can just really, really useful sessions, more than just the leadership side. There were really practical things. And I felt that really, for me, felt a city ready for this kind of next step. So that was good.
It's very good. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go into my portfolio area, which is health. And there have been lots of problems with health in the past. I think we always realise that. And I'm bothered, of course, with the Integrated Care Board that they've got this reduction in funding. And I know you've got an early draft here, but what I'd like to see, if you feel it's appropriate to include it, is some expectation of what health will do. Will they just fill in an EHCP if that's what we end up with? Or will they be really on board to say, no, we're not just doing that little bit of it, we're actually signed up to the whole child, if you like. And I would hope that might happen with mental health services as well as the ICB, the commissioned services in particular. And I'd just like your comment on that.
Yeah, I think as a local area SEND partnership, we are working really, really hard on understanding where our colleagues in health are at the moment, and it's not a great place to be. Obviously, we're very sensitive to that. I think what we get from the colleagues that we work with is a real commitment to partnership working, and that they definitely are wanting to work alongside us in the SEND Hub. It is a jointly commissioned SEND Hub. They have invested in it. They are the provider services have already said what they can provide in the SEND Hub. So I am very optimistic at the moment that many of the things that are talked about through the work that we are doing as an area SEND board will mean that health remain fully committed to the delivery of the strategy and the action plan. And I think we're very fortunate in we have a DCS who will make sure he holds their feet to the fire as well on that. And Councillor Webb knows that that's the case. So I think we're all aware of the risks, but we've also got to be aware that what we see from health colleagues is a lot of commitment to work in partnership.
I've got a supplemental, if I may, and this is really for Jenny. The mental health of the parents. In all my time dealing with children with special educational needs, a lot of the issues come out in the parents, and their mental health, I don't think, has really been looked at. But it really does need to be looked at, because the way they feel mentally affects how the children feel, whatever sort of disability or whatever the child has, it's definitely affected by the parents. So are we going to be, we can't include everything, I realise that, but are we going to have any mention of the parents and how they can be helped and supported?
Yes, one of the Parent Care Forum's top priorities that I've been involved for nearly 3 years and it's been a consistent one, has been parent carer well-being. And so I don't know the strategy off by heart, Victoria, that's over to you. You've written it, but so I'm not sure whether that is actually directly mentioned in the strategy, but certainly through the work of the Parent Care Forum and other providers and charities in York, and through the Send Hub, where we'll be able to reach more families and be able to signpost more people. There is quite a strong offer of peer support, of well-being focused activities. Now, obviously, that's not significant mental health NHS care, but it does help to. The feedback we have is when parents and carers feel they're not alone on this journey, and other people who they can talk to other people who understand, who might have been through that, might have the light at the end of the tunnel. It does improve their well-being, or even just going on a well-being walk or doing a crafting activity and not talking about their young people at all. So that's what we're actively doing currently as one of the charities in York to provide that, and that will be signposted to by us when we meet and greet these parents in the Send Hub. And that is why the Parent Care Forum are the meeters and greeters, because we are independent of council and health services, and they will meet somebody with lived experience, not exactly the same as theirs, but somebody who gets it and who can have that chat, and then sort of signpost them initially. So as it stands, that's something that is doing, but it would be great to look into further. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, just to follow up on Councillor Runciman's earlier point. I mean, I was in a SEND partnership meeting yesterday where health colleagues obviously concerned about changes to ICB, but it's really important to remember that SEND is a statutory service for the ICB, so the two are separate, importantly, and they should be kept separate. That's really hard when you're on the ground dealing with that, I guess. But our health partners and colleagues on the call were really committed that they recognise that it was a statutory part of their service and what they deliver. And yeah, we're committed to continuing their work. And I think the Send Family Hub is a really good example of the power of the City of York Council actually bringing different partners together to work on this project. And again, I'd say that the York Schools and Academies Board, which is, of course, maintains LEA schools, but also our academy system. Again, that only really works through education officers in the City of York holding all those different organisations together. I'm sure many of you remember or know of other authorities where they don't have that relationship with their schools anymore. And that means that all of what we're talking about tonight is made 10 times more difficult. So it's just an opportunity to thank education staff here for what they're doing to keep everything together. It's not perfect, it never is, and it can be fractious at times, but the fact that we're still talking is really important, and we're still doing things jointly is massive.
Thank you. Councillor Rose, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I mean, basically everything that I was going to say or ask has been said or asked. Most of it was just reiterating the importance of that cultural partnership piece, concerns raised by parents, carers, people with complex needs, both adults and children, around ICB, TUV, CAMS, on the health side, and I mean, local businesses for adults, but secondary schools, multi-academy trusts, etc. And I think Bob's point at the end there of how the council has a role in all of that and how we have to try and, we haven't got many levers, but I think there's a recognition of that challenge there is key. But yeah, thanks.
I think just a final point on the culture piece as well, obviously, is we do feel that one of the things that we do need to set this into as well is a whole city culture around inclusion. Because parents and carers of children with additional needs feel better if they are fully included in everything that the city does. And it can be a lonely place if you've got a neurodivergent a child who you're anxious about because you're worried about the views of other parents and carers. And I think it's really important that we view this as well as a culture piece, not just in our professional settings, but also that opportunity to embrace this as a city. And we've got, you know, a strong track record as a city of doing that, of embracing difference and diversity. And I think this, for me, that's why we wanted to call it an inclusion and belonging strategy, because it is so important that people have that sense of belonging to the city and feel included in it.
Thank you very much indeed. I think, you know, we've heard so much tonight that's been so positive, and even things that were, you know, like Councillor Waller saying that people do come up against a brick wall and feel lonely and isolated and frustrated. But I feel that you've taken that on board, and you're addressing that, and this is hopefully why you're moving forward with this. Councillor Webb said change should be cautious and well thought out, with an arm round people and parents, and both children and their parents. Very important. And building trust and reducing parent blame. I mean, that's so important, because I think, you know, talking to parents who blame themselves for something that it's no one's fault. But there are ways out of it, and to be blaming yourself is it's a very negative feeling, and it's a very lonely place to be in. I think we all know we need as much resources as possible, but there are also ways to move forward without just concentrating on money, retraining and looking at ways people are operating in schools. So important. The hubs, I think, are just an incredibly brilliant idea. So a place where children and parents and young people can go for help, which is a partnership with the health resources within the city. And I think whatever comes at us, what we're doing here is building this incredible foundation for change in a positive way within the city of York. And I hope that some of the comments that we've all given tonight have helped you with that. And it's just an incredible piece of work. And thank you all for it as well. Thank you for cooperating and listening, because what as Gain has come out is this listening. We must listen and be innovative, and I think this is. So, you know, how do we get schools to change? We have to listen. We have to get them to listen too. And as we say, that the academies and the are listening and are still linked into the Education Authority, which is a very positive thing. So yeah, people need to listen and respect each other and not judge. Now, Councillor Rose is quite keen to say something. So
it was just one thing I forgot to mention because I cut myself short, which was a thank you to the council from the people I've been speaking to about the language shift over time,
yeah,
that they recognise the council as having moved the ICB and other partners to using the language better. I know there's more to be done, and I look forward to the action plan when that comes through, but I just wanted to add that point around cultural language shift.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, you know, when you think about the neurodivergent strategy and what a terrible place that was at, and now, you know, the organisations within the city that criticised it so badly are praising it now. And it shows that people are listening, which is where we want to be. So thank you all very much indeed for coming along this evening, and any help that we can give you, and good luck with your consultation as well. Councillor Cuthbertson, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask what the sort of next steps are with this, in terms of perhaps consolidating this document in some way, moving towards when you see the action plan being drawn up and coming out?
Yes, so it's changing all the time.
Yes.
So we're consulting over the next couple of months. It goes to exec board in October.
Yes.
So it will be in its finished format then, but we're also going to have the action plan at that point as well. So it will go to exec board with an action plan.
So I suppose my question is, does that come back here?
What, the action plan? No.
I don't think we've got. My understanding is we don't have a September scrutiny.
No.
No.
We have fewer scrutinies. It may be that it could come back as a briefing paper. I'm looking to Guy here because he's the expert on our new system.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the purpose of the briefing would really be to determine whether there's any further scrutiny activity that's required. So if it's felt, if members and the committee feel that there is the potential for further scrutiny activity, that might be a briefing might be the forum for doing that.
Councillor Ware.
Thanks, Chair. I think if we go back to something we said quite a long time ago now, but and I think Councillor Waller sort of said the same thing as well. We've talked earlier on about what might happen nationally. And I think once we're clear on what's going on nationally, that would be something that would be quite useful to scrutinise alongside where we are locally, because it might be that we need to change this strategy. It might be that actually our strategy works really well and fantastic, they all embed together. But yeah, I think I'd probably find that quite helpful to look at any future decisions. But yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. Please feel free to go, and thanks so much for your time this evening. Right, moving on now, we have the work plan to look at, and not only the work plan, we have the task and finish group to consider. Would anybody like a break now? Or I don't think we're going to be here for a huge amount of time longer. Are you okay to just carry on? Okay. Right, so one thing we need to do, and we had Councillor Waller and I had a meeting with James and Guy earlier this week. I think it was earlier this week. It's all merging into one. It was, wasn't it? Yeah, no, it's been a busy week. We need to focus on the task and finish groups, and we also need to look at setting briefing dates. And I think they're going to put some briefing dates into our diaries, and we thought that we would alternate the meetings, actual scrutiny, public scrutiny meetings with the briefing dates. So 1 month a scrutiny, 1 month a meeting, a briefing date. And if we don't need the briefing dates, we can take those out of our diaries, but better to have them in beforehand. Sorry, James.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to say that if it's all right, members, we'll come back to you with some dates for those briefings. I think we've started to identify where some of them could fall, but that might be something we'll follow up with you with, if that's all right.
So that's the briefings, and we also need to get the hang of what could be a briefing paper and what could be coming to scrutiny, and what's going to be a task and finish group. Now, we have, I think, got a list at the back here of suggested, so I get to the right bit in our papers, what could come as task and finish group. Sure, we had that.
You want me to pick up on?
Yes, that will be, yes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just if it helps, just to kind of prompt a discussion for the committee. At the last committee meeting, there was a suggestion by members that we focused our work on 2 in-depth pieces of work, so 2 working groups, one looking at a review and development of working arrangements with York Youth Council, and a second to look at a review of repair service satisfaction with a particular focus on responses from the housing annual survey. There were also some unallocated items. James, I think there was an area that has transferred over from previous scrutiny committee that you want to update onto.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, well, we've got I think we've got 3 items that have come over from this committee's predecessors as possible task and finish groups. One was around food insecurity. One was around education, health and care. Those have both come over from children's and community scrutiny. And then one around home care commissioning that come over from health, housing and adult social care. So we had also had those 3. And I think one other thing to flag to members was I think following the council resolution from March, a task and finish group has been set up to look at proposed changes to long-term sickness and disability benefits. And I think I'm right in thinking, Chair, that the suggestion was that this would come to this committee.
Yes.
So that might be something to consider as well.
I was subbing on Monday for in corporate scrutiny, and it just seems to sit in a better place. The committee with us in people, and it's already Councillor Runciman, you'll remember we've got a date when we're going to meet. So there's Councillor Fenton, Runciman, Stewart, Coles, and myself. So that's going to look at preparing for proposed changes to long-term sickness and disability benefits task and finish group. And that's, instead of being in corporate scrutiny, it seems it sits better with us here in people. So I personally think that's a good idea. I think Councillor Waller agreed as well. And so we have our first task and finish group all set up. But we also, although there are these ones that are left over, what we need to be really sure of is that we want the people to volunteer for these groups who are really interested in these issues. So what we don't want to do is, set a group up and then people don't have any interest in it at all. So if these areas which were being set up for a long time, but nothing's happened on them, maybe we shouldn't carry on with them, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. There are a couple that are left over from the old children's culture and communities. I mean, education, health and care plans seems probably not the best fit now, given that there is speculation about how they may change or not. So it seems, I guess, a bit pointless to do something ahead of any of those national changes. We've not done any work on that, so it's not like lost work as such, I would say. Don't know, Councillor Cuthbertson was on that, may also have a view.
Did you have Councillor Runciman?
Right. One of the things I was going to say is that I hope that yourself and Councillor Waller will make sure that the task and finish groups are spread out over the different subjects. We've got very few meetings to look at an awful lot of things. And it's very easy when we're also interested, say, in education, as we've been doing today, to put them all into education. And Councillor Clark has a very good point. Why are we looking at EHCPs and we don't know if they will continue? But we've got some other areas. We've got housing there, and we need different group of people to look at different things. So we know we're covering the whole of the different areas we're supposed to be looking at.
I agree. And I know when the CQC was happening in adult social care, the commissioners were very interested to make sure that older people were not forgotten. Personally, I won't forget older people, being one. I hope. So yes, there's, but I think it's perhaps better then if we look at the review and development of working arrangements with York Youth Council as a task and finish. Review of repair service satisfaction with a particular focus on responses from the housing annual survey. So I've got hands up over here, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was more of just, I thought I would give you an update on the food security task and finish group, because Councillor Knight and I did quite a bit of work on that, actually. We had quite a lot of meetings and kind of pulled together sort of, I would say, more briefing notes than anything. And then it kind of collided with the fact that Pauline Sturchfield had done, there's a council food strategy, or it was kind of, that was a piece of work that had been done that the council was hoping to, that Pauline was hoping to pick up as well, I think. So I think that what would probably be best was that what needs to happen, or what needed to happen, was just for us to write up kind of those notes. Unfortunately, that was quite a long time ago, because what then happened is, in the week that we had set aside to write it, I accidentally had a baby instead. She was 2 weeks early, and that was so obviously, so that's why we haven't brought anything back to committee, because we'd kind of had that time penciled in to write it all up into something to bring. And then the delay at this point is because on my return from maternity leave, we obviously knew that Scrutiny was changing. There's some quite serious capacity issues now between us. And we were speaking to Reece before the committee's changed about the possibility that there might be in the new framework a little bit of officer capacity to perhaps just help us pull that together into a relatively short paper that can just be presented, attached to it as a briefing note. So I suppose that's a request, really. And without it, I can't necessarily promise anything particularly impressive, because I think that the situation that both of us find ourselves in terms of capacity is quite different now. So anything you might have to say about that, Guy, would be great.
Yep. So following the review by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, recommendations were approved by council, one of which was that we had a dedicated scrutiny resource. So we're in the process of hopefully going out to advert for that very soon. So we'll have a scrutiny officer who will be dedicated to the work in terms of driving forward some of this work, particularly around task and finish groups, and pulling together final reports.
Can we be first on the list? Because I think, well, not first on the list, but I think all that would actually be needed is just a meeting for the three of us to sit down and for us to say, here's what we've done, and for them to pull it into a relatively short, something presentable.
I mean, personally, I would feel more comfortable if it was a committee decision. So if the committee, if the committee are happy with that approach, I would be more than happy to work with colleagues in the team to assist you with that and pull something together.
Brilliant.
Not a problem.
Well, I'd like to propose that to the committee.
You with Councillor Knight as well. How do we feel about this use of resources, or given that they've done all the work, even though it's kind of a year now since it was done? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, if some work has been done on it, then I think perhaps we should have that briefing, the fruits of the labour, if you like, in many senses. I'm just wondering whether also there isn't some connection with York Hungry Minds. I don't know whether Councillor Webb would like to comment on that, or whether there is something in it is more work, or whether there should be some link to looking at that again, and when we bring that back to scrutiny, or however we present it to members.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's kind of up to scrutiny. I think at the last, when we were doing the work planning EPIC meeting, that was raised by Councillor Nichols about the return of the free school meals and Your Hungry Minds work that we've been doing as a final piece. Whenever, guys, bring it on. I'm happy to do that in whatever format you want. The universities have completed their work. That's available now. They're happy to come back and talk to that work. I think I'm happy to talk to it. It's really, really positive. I'm obviously really happy to talk about it. So yeah, in terms of the food insecurity thing, I sort of would suggest that having a separate briefing paper on that is quite useful. As for Your Hungry Minds, I mean, some of the stuff we talk about attendance and things tonight, it plays really strongly into that. Happy to put that whenever you want.
So I think we need to thrash this out eventually. What's the thoughts over this side of the table?
Yeah, I think from the discussions we had yesterday, there will be one officer serving 3 committees. And there does, I think, need to be clarity in terms of the expectations on task and finish groups. The point that I made was not that people weren't interested in the subject area, is that they were too interested in letting everyone know what they thought about the subject area and not actually being structured in terms of there has to be something coming out of the end of this. And it would be helpful to have that mapped out so it's clear that it is not this new scrutiny resource yet to be appointed who will hoover everything up. There does need to be an expectation put on council to say, this is what we are expecting a task and finish group to do. This is what the scrutiny officer can be expected to complete, finish, whatever. And this is the expectations in terms of, we talked about it would be completed within the municipal year, that the restriction on 2 task and finish groups was 2 task and finish groups at any one time. Therefore, if there was an efficient task and finish group that completed, then a new one could be started. And therefore there should be an incentive on these groups to actually get to the point of a report that can actually come back.
I agree. Hang on a minute. I kind of agree with you on this. The only thing is, I hadn't realised how almost ready that is as well. So I think we can sort of try and think outside the box a bit on this one, but also with the guidance from Guy. I think
because that was the discussion about
we did,
task and finish groups yet to start.
Yes.
We didn't touch on work that had already taken place.
Exactly.
We didn't touch on that.
No. And no,
it was having a new, this is in effect a new structure. There's been a multitude of task finish groups over the last 25 years, some of which have reports that are still referenced. And therefore it's taking best practice. But I think it would be useful to have clarity at this point before people embark on task and finish groups afresh. We didn't touch on anything that was effectively in the pipeline.
Yeah. Over to you on this one.
Not quite sure where I start with that one. Yeah, lot to cover. So the key, one of the key things to come out of the review from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny was a particular emphasis on task and finish work. So that all forms part of this new approach. I think perhaps it'd probably be helpful just in terms of context to set out what the corporate scrutiny committee is doing. So they're kind of committed to undertaking 2 task and finish groups over the course of the municipal year, with a view to reporting back over the course of that municipal year. The final reports would always be considered by the committee meeting itself, although there may be work that might be undertaken outside of that. Just in terms of having kind of maximum kind of impact in terms of the work that it produces, it was considered probably the best thing to do would be just to only commit to 2 working groups at any one time, just because you're going to lose that impact. It's not to say you couldn't do 4 or 5, but you'll lose that impact if you're doing all that work at once. Just in terms of the scrutiny resource at the moment, yes, we are going out to ad for that post, but that's not to say that work isn't undertaken. There's lots of work being undertaken at the moment, which is being led by myself and supported by members of the Democratic Services team. But certainly having a scrutiny officer in post will help drive forward some of this work and bring it all together and coordinate coordinate that work. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Was there any aspect of that that you want to clear about, or you want me to
I think
expand on
it
further?
was really for new task and finish, just to say what one officer serving 3 committees could be expected to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That clarity.
Well, the expectation really is no more than 2 task and finish groups over the course of the municipal year. Yeah.
But what do we do with
Could I just ask a
hanging
point?
over?
Can I ask a point of clarification? 2 task and finish groups in total or per committee?
Per committee.
Per committee, thank you.
Yeah. I know it's quite, it's such a new system. We're all getting the hang of it. I know.
Can I just ask for clarification? Does that mean that the committee agrees that we could have a very small amount of this resource or one of the officers' time to just help Councillor Knight and I present to you a slightly better written version of the work we've already done, or not? It's waited for a year.
Yeah, we're happy to support you with that. All I would say from that, if there are particular kind of recommendations as a result of that, then we'd need to bring that back to committee for the committee to agree. I think that would just be the right process to do that. If it's a question of kind of pulling together kind of a paper for kind of information purposes or for wider circulation to members, officers, members of the public, we're happy to support you that as part of the process.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we'd still be able to have 2 ongoing tasks.
And we'd still be able to have 2 ongoing
Yeah.
task and finish groups.
So Councillor Cuthberts and then Councillor Runciman.
May I suggest, Chair, that how can I put it? We could probably have an ephemeral task and finish group reporting while the 2 task and finish groups that we want to set up actually happen. And I mean, since you've done most of the work already, it seems like that would satisfy every possibility.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert.
Yeah, I can propose that if you like.
I'm just going to be difficult and say I'm really pleased to hear that we're appointing a scrutiny officer, but I can remember when we had at least 3 scrutiny officers and also members, some members wrote their own scrutiny reports. Officers didn't write them. Now that was, as they say up here, a bit back, but it's true.
Yes. I think them were days. This is probably covers that. Right. Anyway, it looks like we're going to have that finished off, and then we're going to. So we need to then address. We have the People Scrutiny Committee, Task and Finish Group, sorry, on set up. So are we going to have a look at just one of those topics that we've got here?
I mean, I think it's probably a kind of question of kind of prioritisation for the committee and for members to decide how they want to focus the different pieces of work.
How about we decide that?
Suggest a way forward, then I think you and Councillor Waller should have the information that says this report can be written for this date and this one for this date and so on, so that you and Councillor Waller as chair and vice chair can actually prioritise also according to availability as well as to covering all the areas we're supposed to be looking at.
True, but what we also must be aware of is we have to have interest in the subjects that we're proposing as well, because we don't want to propose things that are not interesting for people, because then it goes on and on. So that's that. We also will probably, I think, be having an informal committee, not on camera, in sometime in September as well, to complete the work plan. And I think the officers are going to look at when papers are needed for executive decision making, so that we can schedule those better, which is something that we agreed in our meeting.
And you've done it better.
Yeah. And they will get a date for the September informal meeting. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it was just a broader point I wanted to raise at the start, but now that we've got a gap between things, I guess it makes sense to raise now around just the scale of the work of people committee, which is something I raised throughout from before we did the review, and I think we've got it wrong coming out of the side, and I said that very openly. You know, we've only got one every other meeting. We've got this intention to have the briefing meetings that will be limited in audience, but some of the suggestions for briefings on here include things like the draft pharmaceutical needs assessment, which has always come to full committee previously, and usually has quite a lot of meat to it. And then the number of task and finish groups, we've got 4 here that are in progress. We're going to slimline that down to 2 rather than expand them. Now, obviously, we haven't, some of these have dragged their heels for years, so there's merit in that. But I just want to ask the question particularly of Guy around how we move some of the effort and work off people committee, so particularly the task and finish groups, but those briefings as well. If it's all on the shoulders of of the core members of the committee, that feels like a huge amount of stuff that isn't going to all shift through. So I just wanted to understand what the expectations were around, if it, is it just going to be the same people on here that are volunteering for those task and finish groups initially, and then it's expanded outwards by email? Ditto for briefings, is that an invitation to everybody, or is it just to core committee members? How's that planning to work in terms of workload?
I do know from the task and finish group, and it was something that I was going to actually raise, is that I think we can join any task and finish group in any other committee if we want to. And in fact, I do know that there's a task and finish group on the budget in corporate scrutiny, and they would like input from somebody on our committee onto that task and finish group.
Yeah, I guess
That's been set up. So, and briefings, I think they're probably going to be open to all members, but I'm not sure. Again, we're in this new area. We're testing out this system, so I'm not entirely sure myself. And that's an ongoing piece of work with we have a working group for chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny. I don't know whether Councillor Waller has got an opinion on all of this.
Well, in terms of the briefings, it was worth setting them up. So they were in the calendar. There's a prospect of setting up a briefing for July when we're already on the 9th. Didn't seem practical. My personal view was to either have entirely in person or entirely online briefings, because hybrid ones get rather complicated, and a test of people's kit and connectivities, which they have very little control over if they go wrong. And then to map out, because largely reports are either ready and officers have written them, or they are some months away, and therefore it's planning that so that there is notice to get reports ready when we need them to be ready for the full committees.
Sorry, Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. I think that if there's an option, or if the committee has the ability to have a discussion about an option for those meetings to be online, then I think that in the spirit of the fact that we've literally been talking about inclusion and an inclusive culture and how important inclusion is, to then say that they must be in person is perhaps a step backwards from that kind of inclusive, aim that we have. I mean, I appreciate that the reality is that a lot of our meetings are already in person all the time, but we've had recent conversations with members of the public about who have additional needs and have disabilities, about how difficult in-person meetings are, particularly when they're long ones. So if there's an option that we as a committee could be deciding that these meetings are online, then I think that there should also be a duty for us as a committee to be allowing there to be an online option.
It's not
in terms of inclusivity.
Yeah, it's not the actual.
No, for the briefing meetings.
And my suggestion was, because I have a particular bee in my bonnet about this from my other work, that post-pandemic, because hybrid meetings did actually give disabled people the advantage of being able to join from home if they needed to. Not that all disabled people would want to, but that I have had a lot of experience of chairing hybrid meetings. However, Councillor Waller was is not keen at all on that, but that's something that we can talk about and discuss.
It was from
Yes.
kind of discussions
Yes.
like, you know,
Yeah.
your experiences that you've just shared, which that
Yeah.
made me want to kind of say,
Yes.
if that, because at the moment that isn't an option and that's fine and we all work around that, but it's
Yeah.
always asking people with disabilities to make concessions. So actually, if there's an ability for the committee to be able to say, this could
Yes.
be online,
Yes.
then I feel like there should also be a duty for us to say this could be hybrid or online. At the moment, the general rules of scrutiny and of these meetings are they have to be in person, and that is the rules.
For these meetings, yes, they.
Yeah, absolutely. My point is, if these briefing meetings, if it is in the committee's gift to say they could be online or they could be at home, then it should also be the committee's duty to make them as inclusive as possible.
Yes, I think maybe that's something that we could revisit at our informal meetings and with the scrutiny chairs working group meeting as well. I think, because I think we'll end up being here till 10 o'clock debating this, yes. So Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, I support online for those as well, for what it's worth. But the two specifics on what I was asking for me are who's, you know, the running of the agreement of what's going to happen in those task and finish. You know, is it just the people around the table who are going to say this is what we think is important, or are they saying this is what I'm willing to volunteer for? And there's a difference in that, because you might find that, especially this committee, if you've got, let's say, housing, health and children as three separate things, if you've only got two task and finish groups between those three things, how does that get decided? And is it based on appetite for being in those meetings? Is it based on need of those groups? So I think something to take away. And the only other thing was just the scale of this backlog, as well as a work plan meeting in September. It makes sense to have a briefing meeting in September and not to then have our first briefing meeting as this committee in November. Because there's a lot on here that is kind of September-ish agenda stuff. So just wanted to clarify that was the intent. That was all.
I think we can discuss that between us. Thank you for that there.
Yeah, I think just coming on your point, Councillor Rhodes. So one of the main purposes of the informal meeting would be to provide an opportunity for members and officers to have that kind of discussion about what the kind of key areas as a result of that piece of work, which areas would make a really good task and finish group, which areas would do we need to keep under review and keep monitoring and come back at a later time. And kind of provide that opportunity to prioritise those areas of work. So it's there to really assist you as a committee and as members to be able to then come back and make that informed decision about how you structure your work plan and undertake that work.
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll call today on this discussion and that of work plan. I don't think there's any urgent business this evening as such. So I'll call this meeting to a close and thank you all very much for your input today, as usual.